Well, hello. Welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast. I'm Paul Zeidman. I'm quite happy to be talking to a gentleman pretty much on the other side of the planet, which is one of the coolest concepts that you can really discuss. This is Carlos Baker, and his bio says songwriter, musician, author, and amputee survivor. So amazing topics all around. Carlos, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, generally amazing guy all around.
Oh, it doesn't say
Thank
that
you for
on the
having me,
bio.
Paul.
You got to talk to
Yeah,
your people about that. So one of the reason I mentioned that he's on the other side of the planet because usually our guests are in the continental U.S., but not Carlos. He is in.
I am currently in northern Germany, so kind of between Hanover and Hamburg. That's
Okay.
how you know I've been in Germany for a minute. I'm an American, but I don't call it Hamburg. I call it Hamburg.
Hamburg. Okay, excellent.
Are
That
you
that is.
impressed, Paul?
I am. I am. I can't wait to hear you, shout out a couple of things in German if needed. So, Carlos, one of the things we like to start things off with on the show is that we discuss anything we have read or watched lately. And I will go first just to give you time to gather your thoughts.
Yeah.
My wife and I just wrapped up watching a show on Hulu called Death and Other Details. It's a 10-part mystery series. And it was good, not great. My thought is that they were trying too hard to do another Only Murders in the Building, and that it was a little more drawn out than it had to be. Some of the episodes were a little slow. It could have definitely been tighter. They could have done this in an 8 episode swing, but yeah, 10. But if you like that kind of, it's a very mystery, like who done it type of thing, and a lot of red herrings. It was fun, enjoyed it. And I also, I wasn't going to see it in the theaters, but everybody said, "Oh, you have to go see it in the theaters." So I went and saw Dune 2,
Oh,
and I enjoyed it. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the books. I liked the first one, and this was really impressive. I think it's very epic in scale. I think that was probably the most impressive part, and the acting was really good. I thought Timothy Chalamet, actually, I was really impressed with how he did in the part, and all of the other supporting parts were good too. But he really, I think he hit a home run on this one. And it's just, if you can see it on the big screen, I think you should, because
yeah.
the way it's presented on screen and the detail and all of the sci-fi-ness of it all really comes into play. I mean, you can probably see it almost effectively on TV, but I think seeing it on the big screen, that definitely is the way to go. So if you get the chance to, do, and if you can't, I think you'll still enjoy it on your, I don't know, your mega big screen that you have at your house.
You
Carlos
you get the sense that Charlem, how do you say his name?
Chalamet.
Timothy Chalamet, that he's going to be that once in a generation guy. I think he's going to be that Matthew
Yeah.
McConaughey, he's going to be up in that register because he just has that. At least it feels like it to me. He's
Yeah,
got that thing,
what is really interesting is that before I saw this, like I've seen other stuff that he's done, and he had a very boyish face. I saw Wonka a couple of weeks ago, and he had this very boyish, impish kind of face. But I think maybe just him aging over the course of filming Dune 2, that by the end, the scenes at the end of the movie, he had a much more mature looking face. I don't know if it was
That's
just the
interesting. Yeah.
way, I don't know if it was just him aging naturally, or like they filmed it that way specifically, or a little help with
Mm,
makeup and some camera tricks. But
yeah.
I thought again, he just did a really good job with holding the whole story down. And also,
That
someone pointed out Austin Butler, who he could not get rid of his Elvis accent. That he definitely does
yeah.
that in this movie.
Oh, that's funny. That reminds me of you remember the story that they shot Castaway, that they shot it so that by the end of he really was that thin, right?
Oh
They
yeah,
shot it
yeah.
in and he was exhausted, and I thought that was so cool, man. I
Oh
remember
yeah,
reading
I
about
think
that.
before they filmed it, before they started filming overall, that Zemeckis had Tom Hanks eat all as much as you want,
Yeah, yeah,
get a
yeah.
little chunky, and then I think they took 9 months off
Okay.
from then to like show how much his character had
Oh, it's so great.
deteriorated, and he's like he's
S-
dropped like 80 pounds and a big
So
bushy
great.
beard, and you see all this
Yeah.
footage of Tom Hanks during that break, and his hair is getting longer and the beard's getting bushier and he's getting thinner and thinner. But we're getting a
Mm,
little off topic. So, Carlos,
yeah.
let's get back to you. So, what have
That
you read or watched lately?
Well, it's funny that, well, first of all, Castaway is also one of those movies, whenever it's on, I can never not leave it on. It's one of those films where you
Hmm.
can always catch a part where you're like, oh, it's so good. By chance, I have been I get in these obsessive modes, part of my personality, and actually, I'm sure we'll end up talking about it. I have challenged myself to, and I've never done this before, but I've challenged myself to write a screenplay,
Very
not to
nice.
try and make $1 million. I'm learning as I get older. This is my lesson to myself
Hmm.
is, you do things because you want to do it, because you want to experience it and you want to grow and you want to see what it's like. And I've, I've, I've spent too many years and too much time on doing stuff with an end game in mind. And all it does is create expectations and disappoint ultimately. So anyway, I've decided to do this. I have the idea for the screenplay, and it's a body switch. Oddly, it's a body switch movie. So I've been kind of obsessively watching the old body switch movies that I grew up with that I haven't thought about in a million years. And I just watched Big, and it was so good. It's so brilliant, man. And Like Father Like Son, which was I don't know if you remember that. It
Oh
was
wow, it's I would say, is that the Dudley
Kirk
Moore
Cameron.
Kirk Cameron one?
Yeah,
Oh
exactly. And then
wow, okay.
the one with Fred Savage.
Oh, that's I think that's, is that 18 again?
No, it wasn't.
Oh, that's, oh, actually, I think that one's with like George Burns and Robbie Benson or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that was it. That's right. But and then I just speaking of big movies and speaking of in that kind of Dune world, I just sat upstairs just now tonight and watched the first Matrix with my 13-year-old. He had never seen it,
Oh
and it
my.
blew him away, man. I was like, right, at the end when that Rage Against the Machine song comes on, I'm like, right, was I wrong? And he's like, yes, he was as into it as I was. That's another amazing movie, man.
That movie came out in 1999.
Yeah,
Just
it's
just to put
crazy.
it just to put it in all in perspective. Wow.
Yeah,
Oh man, I
25 years ago, man. I remember watching it in the movie theater. In fact, I remember the part where do you remember that scene where he flexes when he finally realizes he's the one and he kind of flexes in the hallway and the hallway bows
kind of, you know,
out?
I remember
Yeah.
that.
And I lived in Hartford, Connecticut at that time, and I was in a predominantly African American area where the movie theater was, and the place was packed. It was me and my buddy and a lot of black dudes, and the place erupted when he flexed and the walls kind of bowed out. We just all went crazy, and I was like, "This is the best." Those are good times, man. 25 years ago,
Wow, back when you could really pack a movie theater. It still happens now, but just not as much.
just for Barbie. How old a guy are you, Paul? Are we the same age? I'd imagine we are.
I'm a man of a certain age. Let's just say I am definitely in the half century club.
Yeah, yeah, okay. I turned 15 next month.
Okay. That's a bit in my rear view mirror, but we don't need to go
Well,
into that right now.
you look so young.
I
You're keeping
know.
it together,
It's
man.
all that healthy California living.
That's
Okay,
right.
so Carlos, let's talk a little bit about you. So what is your background? Okay, so I think you mentioned before we started that you grew up in the Connecticut, the Rhode Island area, so
Yep.
that X section in the Northeast. So were you always a writer type, or did you come into it a little later? And also because you're a musician, I mean, were you a musician first and foremost, and now you're kind of drifting a little more into writing?
Yeah, man. God, I feel like I'm a late bloomer. I have to say, I feel like I've had an amazing kind of journey in my life. I'm always curious as how people, when they look back and, you know, I am nothing but amazed at my 50 years on this earth, good and bad. A
Hmm.
lot of setbacks. But when I was a kid, I had a really kind of picturesque, uh, you know, like the dream childhood where my father my grandfather had a small business that he had taken over from my great grandfather, and then my father went to work for him. So I feel like that was the American dream in the 50s and 60s, 70s. And so I grew up in this. My grandfather bought a big piece of property on the outskirts of Providence, Rhode Island, and had a gentleman's farm. So kind of horses and cows and
Hmm.
ducks and goats and all that stuff. And then my father, who came back from Vietnam, went to work for my grandfather, and my grandfather gifted him a little piece of property on his property, and he built a raised ranch. I feel like that's a very American story. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like that would have been the end of the 70s, kind of the baby boomer generation. And then I had this amazing childhood where I grew up next to my grandparents. My brother and I, we had all the toys, the four-wheelers and snowmobiles and all the stuff that you dream of. Um, and then when I was 12 years old, I got totally, from one day to the next, my life changed. I was diagnosed with osteogenic sarcoma, which is a cancer, and that showed itself in my left knee and in both my lungs.
Mm.
So without going into too much detail, because that alone could take up 40 minutes, Paul. But bottom line is, it was 2 years of fighting for my life. I was just a kid. I was only 12 and a half. So I was very much under my parents' kind of, you know, I wasn't thinking I was a young 12 and a half, and I wasn't thinking for myself. So very immature, and naive. And for really, I had 0% chance of survival, but for whatever reason, I'm still here. Ultimately lost my leg to the middle of my thigh when I was 14 and a half. And then the cancer went into remission, and then off I went to make a life as, as normal as I could, which for me meant essentially just pretending I was a normal guy, which I wasn't. Was wearing a prosthesis, and I couldn't do what other kids could do my age. I'm still a big dude, and I was always a big kind of athletic guy. And so all the things that I couldn't do, I just didn't, that was my way of dealing with things. It's just, I pretended like I was normal, and I was a generally happy kid and quite content. It's always was my personality, kind of a free spirit, for lack of a better phrase. But, um, uh, life went on, and the reality is, through college, I also kind of lived a wonderful, the storybook life with friends, and met my wife to be in college and all that stuff. Ultimately, the issue is I had to unpack a lot of that stuff at some point in life, right? That's just how it is. I don't think I knew that, but at some point, I got married, and we had a bunch of kids right in a row. We had 3 kids in 3 years. I went to work for my family because that's what we do in my family. My dad and my brother have a big family business, and bought a house, and had a mortgage, and had kids and responsibility. And from one day to the next, I went into this deep, dark depression. So it is like, just, I had my first panic attack in 2007. And I knew something wasn't right, because I wasn't feeling myself. Something was wrong. But the panic attack, that I was in Boston with my best friend. We went to go see a tennis tournament back then, like McEnroe and those guys would do these kind of tennis pro-am tournaments where you could just go watch them play. Anna Kournikova, and I always was a tennis fan. And we were sitting we were watching. I was having the time of my life, and I had my first panic attack. I had never experienced anything like that. So for me, from one second to the next, once again, my life changed, because now I am now all of a sudden, I'm no longer a healthy, normal, guy in his mid-30s. Now I'm a incredibly um, scared and afraid little boy in this man's body with all these responsibilities, and I just couldn't handle life. So essentially, I shut down. I went from having this really kind of robust, full life with a job and my family, and then I just couldn't handle it anymore. So I shut down, which is kind of frightening. Obviously, at the time, it was fucking incredibly frightening, and daunting. But ultimately, after a bunch of years of just hiding and not knowing how to handle it and what to do, almost 2 years of that, I finally got some help, and got on some meds, and at least got back to some kind of normal, where I could at least function in some normal way. For 2 years, I couldn't really function. I was, unfortunately or fortunately, because, I come from a family with a little money and means, and I wasn't, I didn't get put into a hospital, and which really would have helped me speed up the process of getting better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I kind of hung around, and ultimately I reached out for help and got on the right meds. And my wife and I made the decision, once I kind of got to this, you know, neutral, we decided to pack up all our stuff and make a move. And that's when we moved to northern Germany, to the little village where she was born and raised. She's a German lady. And and then all of a sudden I found myself in this little village that it feels like it's 100 years back in time, where everyone my wife grew up with is still in the village. They all live. It's fascinating, man. There's a lot of, it's an old farm, like kind of farming community. So there's a lot of farmhouses where there's two, three, four generations is the norm. People just stay in these big farmhouses.
Wow.
And you know, we have our kindergarten and our grade school, I guess you call it, in our little village. So we moved to this amazing place where it's another world. I don't speak German, or I can fake it now after 15 years, but I didn't speak German at the time. I was this big long-haired American dude, and here I am. My wife went back to work, so we moved to Germany. My wife went back and got a full-time job, and I was now the caregiver of my then 7, 6, and 4-year-old
Oh,
children.
wow.
So I was bringing them to these German schools, and it was, you know, when we look back, it's so surreal because there were such crazy times in that it was as bizarre a place I could possibly be in. I was also recovering with mental health issues, but we were making it happen. It felt right, and my kids were happy. And then we had another baby, which was not planned. So throughout this time, kind of post-depression is when I really started. First of all, I was always a reader, but I found myself kind of certain books, interestingly, where I'd reread them over and over. Very odd. I I found such solace in these books, in these communities of
Mhm.
characters within the books. Two in particular, a book called Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry.
Mhm.
If you
Great
haven't
book.
read it,
Oh,
it's the
yeah, I love
best.
it.
It's one of those kind of, 1,200
Yeah,
page
it's like a sprawling Western epic.
epic where these two old Texas Rangers, kind of retired Texas Rangers at towards the end of their lives, uh, they they steer they take 3,000 head of cattle from Texas to Montana because,
Hmm.
and it's this amazing story, and I found so much comfort in that world. Again, was always a reader, but I felt like I was reading differently at that point in my life, and was kind of reading anything I could get my hands on because I had time, and it gave me, it was a peaceful thing that I needed at that point. And also music, again, because I had time. I had always played music all my childhood, and always kind of played in bad rock and roll bands and was always singing. But I started playing music more, taking it more serious. And one thing I got to say is, as an American, as a kind of a big American dude who likes to sing rock and blues music, if you're a decent singer and player that likes to do that, and you're a real American, you can kind of find a home anywhere in the world because people love that, right?
Mhm.
I mean, Germans love rock music and they love blues. So I found myself kind of, I found this community of musicians that took me in. And so I had kind of these angels all around me here that were helping me recenter and refocus, myself. And all along, I had to do a lot of work too. And I'm sorry to get off topic on you asked about writing. It's
No,
it's
no,
kind of
that's
one of
fine.
those
It's
things.
fine.
Yeah, I'm getting to it. Is I had to do a lot of work to make sense of, and I'm 50. This happened in my mid 30s. I feel like I'm still trying to understand it, which which is either just human, is just trying to understand me, trying to figure myself out, right? Maybe that's just a human thing, and that's what we're all supposed to be doing, because what the hell else is the point of life? Or it's an artist thing where I do consider myself an artist. So maybe it's my journey of trying to figure things out and feeling like I have stuff to, a story to tell. Again, I feel like one of my learnings is it doesn't matter if I have a story to tell. It only matters that I want to tell my story. I think my confusion with being an artist is that you have to find some success and some greatness within this whatever art form you do. And as I get older, I just realize that if that's what you go into, it's not a pure way to go into art, right?
Mhm.
Like when I made my decision when I started writing original songs and making albums, I was like, I'm gonna fucking make it. And it's like, no, man, that is, first of all, no, you're old and no. And second of all, it's like you just can't go into it that way. It's not pure, it's not honest, it's just not how it works. And
Yeah,
so ultimately, go ahead.
I was to say we've talked about that on the show before, is that you should write because you like writing,
Yeah,
not because you think it's an easy buck or like this is my ticket to fame and fortune. Because
yeah,
no, because you might not get there. And the one thing I did want to ask you is that we've had a few other guests on the show before that they've gone through some really, tough personal times, and that a lot of them have used writing and just being creative, and I guess even for your case, even just reading and just kind of getting lost in a good story that is extremely helpful and therapeutic for them. And it sounds like that's what it was for you. I mean, it started with the reading, but then but you were also musical throughout your life, and now you're starting to dip your toes into writing more. Now, do you find that kind of like activating the creative part of your brain, that it's just like, I'm really enjoying this and I'm really feeling good about myself while I'm doing this?
yeah. I mean, 100% yes. I mean, there's no doubt the songs, songwriting, I feel like is, from at least for me, is a little different than when I
Like
wrote the.
writing like fiction or just writing
Yeah,
prose?
yeah, because songwriting, again, for I can only speak to my experiences. It seems to me it's much more of like you're waiting for some sort of an inspiration to happen, and then you're trying to be that conduit, and you're listening and hoping to capture something, right? At least that's my take on it. Like I've used the example, the first song that I wrote as an adult. So I always kind of messed around when I was younger, writing blues songs or, easier stuff. But the first song that happened when I was here in Germany is I can remember it so vividly because it was so, it, it gave me, it kind of gave me like the goosebumps. So, it was one of those moments, where I
Like you
was
knew this is it.
driving. Yeah, well, it happened and I'm like, oh, that that's something, like that's significant. So it's again happens to be around tennis, but my wife and I were driving to a tennis tournament that's about an hour away from our little village here, in Halle, Germany, where we were going to see Roger Federer play in a Wimbledon warm-up tournament. And I was listening to a CD of one of John Mayer's CDs, and it has this song in it. It's called "In Repair," the song. And that's the hook. He says, "I'm in repair." And I thought he was saying, "I'm ill prepared.
Hmm.
I'm ill prepared." And I was like, "Oh, that's ill prepared. That's cool." That's how I felt like when I became an adult. It happened all very quickly, where I was like, I like that word because I really can relate to that word. I was ill prepared for adulthood. I was ill prepared for responsibility. I was ill prepared for life. Like I always felt that as when I kind of transitioned into being an adult. And then again, I think, I don't know if I had liner notes, but then I read and I was like, oh, it's in repair. Oh, ill prepared is kind of cool though. And from that came my first song. And the hook, the first line of the song is I'm ill prepared for this particular hard day's life lesson. I never feared the great unknown. And so I remember that happening, and I was like, oh, if that happened once, now I need to be aware of that. Because an entire song kind of showed itself, a melody, and I worked on it. I clearly didn't have the same, it's been now 15 years of working on being a songwriter. And I've learned tremendous amount of skills that help me now kind of produce songs. Back then I had none of those skills, but I knew it happened, and I knew I wrote it down, and I knew I remembered it and I could play it. And um, that was a huge moment for me. And that happened often, and it was always dark stuff. It was always um, the emotion that I struggle with to this day, but certainly at that point in my life, was this shame of not being um, successful. So, which of course, that statement means nothing, because what do you mean by that? Well, financially, I guess. Okay, well, you have 4 kids that are healthy and happy, and you did a good job raising them. Yeah, but that's not, so like
Yeah, but
I've done this a million times, right? But so shame was the emotion that I was really trying to work through at that point. So all these emotions and stuff that I'm sure that I hadn't been properly dealt with from my childhood. Um, and that was, and kind of speaking to that, is in about 2017, my daughters would have been in their early teens at that point. And I was at that point reading a ton, although I probably read more now, but then I was reading a lot as well. And I'd read anything I could get my hands on, because we were in Germany. This was pre-Kindle, at least for me.
Mhm.
I didn't have a Kindle. And it's kind of cool in Germany. Our big grocery chain is called Edeka. And in every one of these Edekas, they have like what would you call it? Like when you leave a book and take a book type area?
Like a lending library type of
Yeah,
thing.
like a lending library. They have it in every single one. It's very cool. So every time I went shopping, which was 2 or 3 times a week for my family, I would walk by, and most of the times there'd be at least one of the 500 books would be in English. And whatever it was, it didn't matter what it was, I'd take it. And that's what I would read, which was really cool, because it would be all over the place. A lot of times it was it would be typical stuff that high school kids would have to read here in Germany, like Brave New World, or,
Mm.
1980, like the stuff that we even
Yeah.
grew up with, what Catcher in the Rye. But other times it was just totally random, and I loved it, because I wasn't always reading for the enjoyment. A little bit of it was escapism, and it was also for ideas. I was always like, well, you never know if you're going to catch, you know, in fine prose, maybe you're more likely to find a cool phrase or something, but in shit books, you also might find something really interesting. We'd be like, well, that paragraph is really interesting, right?
Hmm.
I found myself kind of being I don't know, reading from that point of view. So then when my kids were about seven, in 2017, they were in their teens, they were all readers as well. So for Christmas that year, 2000, the Christmas of 2017, we bought my daughters each a bunch of young adult books, like let's say 5 each or something. And later on in the day, I was reading the back of each one of them, because I'd read anything we had in the house. So I would read them too. And I was reading them, I was like, okay, I feel like I could write a young adult book. Like I think I could do that. I've raised my kids. I was really close with my daughters at that point, because they're volleyball players, and we were a traveling family, because they're high level volleyball players. And I was with them all the time in the car. And I felt like I was really in tune with where they're at. I was watching them have their first relationships and first love, and talking about it and all this kind of stuff. So, and again, for me, my take on young adult books is, it's not so much about prose. It's really about the story, right? Because
Hmm.
you don't, a kid doesn't want to get caught up in fine writing. And I'm not really, the reality is I'm not a professional writer, but I was like, I think I could write a young. So the beginning of 2018, January 1, I bought a crappy little computer, and I started writing. And I had no plan. I wasn't, I didn't have an outline or anything, but I felt like something would happen. And I did that every single day for 18 months. Every day, obsessively. I got completely obsessive about it, and I was getting up early in the morning, making myself a little sick from it, not sleeping enough. But um, getting up early in the morning, staying up way too late at night. I loved writing at night. I found like that was the best time for me from a creative standpoint. And then any time in between. So if I had 20 minutes in the car, I'd have my, and and a story kind of developed, and it's there's about five, I think, five storylines that are kind of interwoven within the book, or six, I guess. And essentially they were all just the people that made the biggest impression upon me in my life, right? Because what else do you write about? I don't know how Stephen King does it, but so it's just the people that fascinated me, or that I was that made an impression upon me. And for me, that meant, someone that was a drug addict for 20 years. I've always been most attracted to people that have big problems, or big challenges. I don't know why. I don't think it's I don't think it's darkness. It's just that's what makes life interesting, right? If
Hmm.
you have challenges and you got to face them.
Right.
And also, go ahead.
Oh no, it's gonna. So is that what the book, is that what Songs for Ivy, that was the end result of this?
Yeah, yeah, that was the novel. The main character is a 16-year-old girl who when she was 1 year old, her 16-year-old brother, was had so and that really represents me. He was a boy that was terminally ill with the cancer that I had. He had lost his leg. He had gone through the chemotherapy, but the cancer came back. He was terminal and decided to leave a journal for his then 1-year-old sister to get to know him in his words. And he instructed his parents to give it to her on her 16th birthday. So that's how the book starts. And needless to say, the that character was the most fascinating character for me to dig into. And of course this wasn't planned, Paul. I mean, I'm
Sure.
clearly not smart enough to plan this, but the fact is, I when this character came about, I then had to, you know, dig into those memories of what the sounds and smells and experiences that I had during chemotherapy, during all my surgeries for the cancer in my lungs, during the amputation, all this stuff that I I would say I don't think I certainly had never talked about them, but I'm not even sure I had ever revisited them,
Hmm.
because it was just my way of dealing with stuff. Is put, that I don't talk about that stuff. I'm not handicapped. I'm normal. I'm fine. But instead, I had to dig into, okay, what would be of value that I remember that I could share, that this character would share. And it was obviously incredibly therapeutic.
Hmm.
And there were things that I shared quite a bit of this, obviously, with this stuff with my mother, who I'm really close with. And she and I together had it was such an emotional experience, because her and my father experienced this stuff with me, but they don't talk about it either. We do it just, once I was healed from cancer, once I was in remission, it was like it never happened. So, and I can use an example is post amputation, and this is one of the chapters in the book, in this journal that this character writes, is post amputation that the doctors, they wrap the stump with like a, what do you call that, the you know
Gauze,
when you break your arm, what do you call that,
a splint, cast.
cast. So
Okay.
they put like a cast, a really really tight cast over the stump that's left, so that it keeps the swelling down,
Hmm.
right? So let's say 2 or 3 days after they amputated my leg, so I'm a 14 and a half year old kid. The doctor and I are in a room, and he says, "Hey, okay, we're gonna cut the cast off, and we're gonna take a look and see how it's healing." And I'm like, "Okay." And he uses one of those machines and cuts the cast, and takes the all this bloody gauze and all that iodine and all that shit, and and here I am, a 14 and a half year old boy, a 40-year-old doctor, staring at my, gross, bloody stump. And I can remember so vividly. The doctor was like, "Well, Carlos said," he's like poking it and prodding. He's like, looks really good." And I'm like, I don't, Doc, I don't know that I agree. Like there was a moment of levity, even
Sure,
in that
sure.
moment. Like, what else do you say? I had tears in my eyes. I was looking at my gross, and I'm like, I think we're gonna have to agree to disagree because it looks gross.
Yeah.
But the fact that I had to not only find that memory, but commit it, put it down on paper. I think that was one of I think it was one of the most there those experiences, that 18 months. There's a reason why it was so heavy. It was such a wonderful experience to do, and I do feel like I got that stuff out that probably needed to come out,
Hmm.
so yeah, it's like when people are like, "Oh, I don't know how you wrote a book." I'm like, "Dude, fucking write a book, man. Sit down and like it doesn't have to be a good book. I'm not saying my book's great. I don't know. My friends and family like it, but um it's just one of those things. I if my go-to statement in my head at night when I'm in that space that I shouldn't be is I am not a successful man. It's these things that I can hold that book in my hands. It's finished. It's for sale on Amazon. Please go order it. And it's one of those things where I started it and I finished it, and I'm super proud of it. It was an amazing experience. As you know, I'm sure as a writer, is once the realization that the book came to an end at about 135,000 words, the story arcs all kind of found themselves. And um whether it's a great book or not, I don't know, but I then realized that, oh, this is just the beginning. I have 135 words, but now I need to work with as you know, an editor. And I
Sure.
found a wonderful developmental editor out of Israel that worked with me, and she was great and tough, and I totally trusted her, and ultimately got the book down to, I think it ended up landed at about 80,000 words. And I'm so proud of it, man. I rewrote it 10 times,
Hmm.
after working with her. I kept rewriting it, kept tightening it up. And at some point, my mother, who kept reading my rewrites, she was like, "At some point, you can't keep doing this. It's done." I'm like, she's like, you got to be done with it."
Hmm.
So I ultimately did find a small little publishing house in Rhode Island that did the line editing, and put it on Amazon, and I'm incredibly proud of it, man. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life, certainly.
That is fantastic. So I do have two questions about the book. So the first one is that a lot of writers, especially, you keep this in mind for your screenplay, that a lot of writers, like, every character is in some way a reflection of them. So you've got your main character in your book, but you also have all these other supporting characters. I mean, I know it's probably like you probably based like the parents on your parents, but did you find as you were writing it and also as you were doing the rewrites that you could kind of see like, oh, this character, that's like one little aspect of my personality. And before you answer that, so the second question is that you were talking about how it was great to finally like be able to discuss what you went through in the form of the book. Do you have I guess a different perspective of these things that happened to you before because you were able to put those memories in your own way onto the page, that it's, not only was it therapeutic, but it kind of like freeing, like it kind of liberating, like just it's great to finally get this out in the open type of thing. So whichever
Yeah,
question you want to do first.
yeah. I think I feel like the therapeutic part, it almost goes without saying. You had already mentioned it, and of course, right? I think what I learned from more importantly, what I learned from it was, because I was trying to make sense of how this 16-year-old boy's death at 16. I was trying to make sense of how it would affect the parents at that point, 16 years later, and how it would affect this then 1-year-old sister, how her life would be different. So I feel like it forced me to look at how my illness and my path and journey, young journey, how it affected my community.
Mm.
And that was something I had never done before. And I think that was I think it was so important for me to have a little different perspective of, and this one's weird, man, but the realization that going through fighting for your life for 2 years, getting chemotherapy for a year and a half, multiple surgeries, all this stuff, it was harder on my community than it was on me. And that was it was I feel like it was a super important lesson for me because although I'm not that guy that is like, woe is me, I'm not a complainer. I've never complained about my leg. I never complain about pain or what I can or can't do, but it's there, right? Whether you say it out loud, you can still it's still there. I think realizing um that when you're sick and you're almost a little I was almost kind of a celebrity, and that sounds ludicrous, but within my little world and community that I grew up in, I was the kid that had cancer. I was the one that then, was the kid that they cut his leg off. I was the kid that then survived cancer. So it's like, I don't know. In retrospect, it obviously shaped who I am. I mean, obviously, it shaped my personality. It shaped my, physically it changed my path on what I would have done or who knows. But the realization, and there was several conversations that once again I revisited as an adult and recognized the weight of them. One of the examples from the book is I was really close to my grandmother. So I'm guessing I was in my late teens. I think I was driving. So let's say I was 17, and I went to visit my grandmother in Rumford, Rhode Island after school. And we had learned a little about the Great Depression. So I went to my grandmother and I was like, what, I was asking her if she remembers the food shortages or, those type of questions that a high school kid would ask. And I was like, well, I called her Nani. I was like, Nani, what's like the worst thing that happened to you in your life? And she kind of was like, thought about it. And she's like, well, you. And I'm like, ha ha ha. I thought she was joking. I was like, no, because she was kind of funny, I guess. And I'm like, no, really. And she's like, no, you. Like you getting sick was the worst thing that happened to our family. We didn't know if you were gonna live or die. And I'm like, even as a 17-year-old kid, that was baffling to me. I was like, me getting sick was a big deal to you? Like, but I'm fine now. And that seems, it might not seem like that heavy a real memory, but something about the weight of her answer, it hit me as an adult so hard, so much harder than it had when I was a kid. It didn't affect me as a kid, but I think it helped me realize how much I had affected my brother's path. I'm quite close with my brother, but we've had falling outs in our lives, and he has his issues like anyone. And I'm obviously close with my parents, but they have their lives. And I think I started to realize it gave me perspective on how much it screwed them up and
Mm.
how different, and I've said this a few times and people don't love when I say it, but I almost feel like my father never recovered from in some ways emotionally from me getting sick. And again, as an adult with 4 kids, one now 13 years old, the same age I was when I got sick, I was his little buddy when I was that age. I was a good athlete, a good hockey player, and he was the one that was driving me around all the time. And I think when I got sick and when they all just assumed I wasn't gonna survive, which again, I didn't realize that it was even a chance that I would die. I just was one of those guys that assumed that I'd get better. I don't know why. It's very bizarre, but I think my father took it so hard as I perhaps I would if my boy got sick now do you have kids, Paul?
I do. I have a daughter.
So if your kid has a stuffy nose, you're like,
Well,
oh,
well, my daughter was hospitalized a couple of years ago, and we didn't know what the problem was, and she was in the hospital for like 5 days. and they went through this whole gamut of tests and like, okay, could be this, could be this. In the end, it turned out to be lupus. And so,
Oh,
but during those 5 days, you feel helpless.
yeah,
That I can totally relate to what your dad was going through
yeah,
because you hate to see your child suffer. You hate to see them be in any kind of pain or
yeah.
that uncertainty. It's heartbreaking, and you do the best you can to like try and stay positive, and you also have to do that not just for you but for your child,
Mhm.
because for
Yeah.
them to just see you just break down, that's not going to help them. So you have to put on a brave face and be as strong as you can for them, even if on the inside you're just like, oh god.
Yeah,
so
and
you so
which again, I just didn't know that, and he was that was a great way of explaining because he was kind of that clown. That was his role. Is he was going to make me. He was going to act silly. It didn't matter how heavy a moment it was. It didn't matter if I was puking 1,000 times in that week because I had just gotten methotrexate or. But he was the one that was keeping it light all the time when clearly it was not light. Again, I didn't recognize the weight of the situation, but
Mhm.
yeah, I do feel like and my mom, my mom's a little different because she has always been uh more in tune with her emotions, but I do feel like, that there's parts of my I feel like my illness shaped my community more than it shaped me. And that's an interesting realization. It also is a little bit of a heavy realization, right?
Mhm.
It also can be one that you know, perhaps I do feel a little guilty about more than anything my brother who was 3 years older than me, and basically myself and my parents, we moved to Boston for 2 years. My parents had a little money. They bought an apartment next to Boston Children's in Dana Farber, and we essentially lived there for 2 years. So my brother was left to fend for on his own. He had my grandparents living next door, but also, um and he's had tremendous success in his life, tremendous financial success. But there are parts of his life that sometimes I think to myself, oh, I'd imagine that I am responsible for
Mhm.
some of those issues. I mean, nothing I can do about them, but
Right,
it's
right. So I want to go back to the first question about the characters in your book.
mm,
So I originally asked about, were they so the characters, I guess, like little parts of your personality, but it also sounds like a lot of your family and your community, that they were also like, I guess, contributing factors. Like, there's a little bit of you, there's a little bit of your brother here, and
mm.
maybe your grandparents or your parents. Was that something that just kind of came to be as you were developing the story, or is it you kind of went into it like, okay, this character has a brother and my brother was just like that, and that's how I'm going to write this character?
No, it definitely wasn't like that. The characters are definitely much more, other than the main character, the Ivy, who is more like my daughters, but the other characters all have. So there's no clear kind of bad guy
Right.
in this book. Each character has their demons. Really, their inner demons are is their the adversarial kind of character that they're
Hmm.
working against. And and it was all one of my best friends in the world comes from a rich, a wealthy Jewish family, very loving parents. Was given everything he could have been given as a kid. We went to high school together and ended up for over 20 years heroin addict. And 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 throughout it all, as best I could, I always stayed in touch with him because I always loved him. I loved him as a kid. I I I always reached out to his parents, who I was really close with, even when he was at his worst. Maybe once a year, I that was back in the phone days. I would call his home phone in East Greenwich, and I would just check in. I check in with his parents. I'd say, "Mr. or Mrs., how are you? How is he? Well, more the same, but what can they say? But I would always try and make an effort to see him, although it was tough. It was tough to see him. But there were so many things that he said to me throughout those years that fascinated me, and they all stuck with me. I think I was always, even though I didn't know it, I was always amazed at different perspectives of people. And I'll use an example as one of he and I's, when he was still using, we had a mutual friend who, and this is pretty dark, but he died at his older brother's bachelor party in the bathroom in their house.
Oh God.
Okay, so he had the bachelor party going on the night before the wedding. This is a rich Italian family from Rhode Island, and he died of a drug overdose the night of the bachelor party. Needless to say, the wedding was called off, and it was a nightmare. So and I was like, oh, of course it affected me, just because it was a crazy story. So when I ran into my best bud who was using at the time, I said, yeah, did you hear about so and so? And he's like, yeah, but that's not an accidental overdose. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, he was a drug guy, and drug guys know how much drugs they can do. That was not accidental. So that was a choice. He committed suicide using the drug that he uses. And I don't even know if that's true, right? How the hell would we know that?
Mm-hmm.
But I remember being like, wow, I would have never, ever in a million years come up with that angle. Like, to me, that was not even in the realm of a, but but I remember him telling me that and me being like, oh God, that's fascinating. Whether it's true or not, it's so cool that this guy, because he's from this other world that I can't even begin to comprehend, that he can kind of have that. So that particular character in the book, his arc is ultimately going back, falling off the wagon, using heroin again, and ultimately makes bad decisions. And then he dies of an overdose. And I do my best in the book, whether I do pull it off or not, to that the reader's not sure if it was by choice or not. So that was my process, right? Is things that fascinated me over my life. I'm lucky enough, maybe, I don't know if that's luck, to be able to recall that stuff. It's in there somewhere, and and that's how it happened. And I had so much fun doing that, Paul. I think there were also characters, like two of the main characters are exact replicas of Captain Call and Gus McCrae from Lonesome Dove, the two
Oh,
main
okay.
characters. And those characters are two of my best friends in the world. So I certainly borrowed from Mr. McMurtry. I borrowed his characters, and because I loved they have this amazing relationship as well. So it was kind of all over the place, and it wasn't planned at all. It was just, the characters were showing themselves, and I'd literally sit down and be like, oh, I wonder, let's see, maybe, well, yesterday I finished a chapter on that character, maybe I'll talk about this one today. So there was no plan, but very kind of organically it happened. And then it felt so organic the way it ended, because they all found their way, for better or for worse. It's a little bit of a darker ending, and I didn't know how it was going to end. And the main character, the father and Ivy, who were really the main characters, I was so happy with the ending. It's so proud, and every time I do read the book, and I reread it every once in a while, usually when a friend or family reads it and they give me feedback, I'm like, I gotta reread it and remember what the hell I wrote. And every time I get to the end, I literally tear up, because I'm like, oh, that is really sweet that it ended like that. So what's better than that, man? Being proud is the best,
Yeah, as well you
nonstop.
should. I mean, it's because you said you spent 18 months working on it. And that was just
18
the
months
and that
straight.
sounds that was just the writing of it, and then you went through the whole editing and rewriting process.
Yeah, another probably over a year, certainly. And
Hmm.
the good thing about me is I get obsessive. So I, I make myself crazy until it's
Hmm.
finished, which is good and bad. The writing part I got really crazy about because I loved writing. It's so odd, but I loved writing when I was very tired,
Hmm.
which is dangerous. But I loved writing at night very late, and then I liked writing, getting up really early in the morning and writing because I don't know, I felt like that was when I was super tired was when the things were most kind of I don't know, I could capture stuff more when I was not quite awake or something like that. I'm not sure why that is, but
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you can really tell, I mean, I can definitely tell it with screenplays and with books, is that the writer enjoyed writing it.
mm,
Because there's like a vibe or an emotion that comes through from the words on the page that it's just like you could tell the writer put so much work into it. Yeah, and granted, it could be after a couple of rewrites, but at the core of it, the heart of it, you can really sense that the writer loves the characters and loves the story and just loves telling the story. And that's really that's what I'm getting from you, just the
yeah.
way you've been talking about it, that there's so much heart and emotion and so much realism, like all these things that happened to you, or like your version of how it happened, and
Mm.
how you want to relate that to the reader. And that's really hard to pull off for a lot of writers.
I like what you said, Paul, because your version of it, because that's so true, right? Like it's how my mother loves to, part of I've done a bunch of these interviews.
Hmm.
I think I've done about maybe 50 of them over the last 6 months. And my mom listens to everyone, of course. It's my mom,
Of
and
course.
she's always like, she'll like correct, and I'm like,
She's
she'll
got
correct
notes.
some. Yeah, yeah. She's like, if you have time, I'd like to go over a few things. I'm like, Mom. Anyway, I remember I learned this lesson. I listened religiously to this wonderful podcast called "How Did This Get Made?" And
Oh
one of
yeah.
the guys on. Have you ever listened to it?
I haven't listened to it, but I know of it because Paul
Oh, it's great.
Shear
Yeah,
and they're
and
comedians talking about
Manzukis.
movies, really.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm a huge fan. I actually got to see one of their live shows in Chicago last year. I was in Chicago at the time. But one of the guys on it, his name is Jason Mantzoukas. He's
Mm,
quite an accomplished actor and comedian and stand or I think more of an improv guy. And he fascinates me. So anything that's on YouTube that he's done, I have seen. I follow his movie career. I just love the way he expresses himself. He's fascinates me. So on one of his interviews, he was on Mark Maron, and Maron did it. It was a great interview, of course. Two huge personalities, monster, you know, improv, witty, all that stuff. And Manzukis tells this story how he wanted to be a drummer up until college. He was planning on being a professional drummer. So he tells, oh God, if Manzukis ever hears this, he's going to hear me call him out. This is a nightmare for me. But anyway, uh, and so he talks about he's going to be a professional drummer. He's obsessed with it in high school and going into college, and then at some point finds improv, lays off drums and goes that direction. And Marin, who's an accomplished musician, a real great guitar player, was like, well, how are you now? And Jason Mantzoukas is like, in high school, I was really good. Now I'm solid. And like as a musician, talking to another musician, if you say I'm solid, then you are solid. Like because you wouldn't bullshit that, right? That's
mhm.
and then I caught this is a bummer. I caught like a snippet on YouTube of him on stage playing drums, and he can't play. He is not a drummer. Funniest guy in the world. I adore this guy, but he's not a drummer. So I feel like that was a bit of a lesson for me too, right? Like it's your story, man. Like Manzukis can tell whatever he can tell whatever story he wants. He can say that he's a professional drummer. But I do feel like part of your story is taking liberties. And it is this is my version of my reality of how my childhood has kind of unfolded. But I'm not sure how much of it is true, but it's what I remember, man.
Well, the important thing is you're telling a story. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate, like because that's what a lot of movies that are based on true stories. That a lot of times the writer, you have to take liberties. You have to
Yeah.
Hollywood it up to make it
Yeah.
a more interesting story. If that means adjusting things or changing things around, then so be it. I mean, if you're more worried about upsetting people that it's not 100% accurate, then you're kind of, shooting yourself in the foot before you even
Yeah.
start. And
Yeah.
so, that's not something that you should worry about. The important thing is that you put in the work and you told a story that you told the story that you wanted to tell.
Yeah.
And in the end, you're really happy with it. And that's really the important thing.
And I'm and Paul, I'm doing the same thing with music now. Is I've I've done it enough times. I've worked with enough other kind of producers and other musicians to know that if I'm just looking to find someone that's going to help me write a hit, it's just it's the worst way to go into anything,
Mm.
man. And now I, I've finally done it enough times. I think who knows, but I do feel like I've finally been like, okay, that's not the point of this. The point of it is just creating music because that's what you love to do. You love to be in your little studio. You love to come up with ideas and you like to bring them to life. You're not, it's like you're not John Mayer. John Mayer doesn't sit, John Mayer does not sit in his studio and be like, what hit am I gonna,
I need to write a hit song.
it's just happens to be that he's John Mayer, that he looks like John Mayer, that he plays, he sings, he's got it's just how it is, right? So that's just his truth. That's his honesty. It happens to be able to cross over to millions of people, and he's tremendously talented, and I'm not, but it is what it is, man.
Yeah, but you have fun doing it. And so that's going
Have
to
a
lead me
blast.
to my final question is that because okay, so for the audio listeners, Carlos is sitting in his home, I guess, studio, and he's got several guitars. There's two on the wall, and there's an acoustic one, I guess, sitting on the floor. And so I would be very remiss if I didn't ask you to at least sing one of your songs.
Oh,
One of the blues songs would be great because I love the blues. I think that would be a great way to close things out. So you'll sing, and then we'll do our wrap up.
can you
He's
hear
already
me
got it in
okay?
place, so I guess we're gonna be entertained right now.
Ain't got no lover, ain't got no brain. I got plenty of thoughts rushing through my head. Don't mind my neighbors, they don't like me. Say I had no right down them big tree. Ain't never had no job. Yeah, I sleep all day. I dream to get out into this big bad world, but I can't find my way. Well, I got them blues. Life feels so wrong. Yeah, I got them blues. Feel like a muddy water song. Yeah, I got them blues. I'm always struck by fear. I pack my bags, make big plans, but don't get nowhere. Yeah, I got them blues.
Oh,
Thank you.
oh, that was great. That was so nice. What a
I haven't
great
played that
way,
song in a
what a
minute.
great way to end things today. Carlos Baker, this has been a fascinating and really entertaining interview. I'm so glad you were able to be on the show today. And so, just so people can track you down, so the website is ckbakerband.com. Are you on any other social media?
I'm not so hip to social media, but I did make a wonderful album with a great producer in Chicago last year. His name is Brian Deck. He's kind of a real guy, and I threw a bunch of money at it, and it was a wonderful experience. And I'm super proud of the album. It's called Find Your Way. That's streaming everywhere. CK Baker Band. Yeah, and please, if you're a reader, please take the time to read the book. It's called Songs for Ivy, and it was certainly a project of love and sweat, but I'm super proud of it.
As you should be. Carlos, thank you again so much for being here today. This was just great stuff. I loved it.
Thank you, Paul. I had a blast, man.
All right, fantastic. Well, readers and list readers, there's nobody reading this. They're listening to it or watching it. That's how much this influenced me. If you like this, please hit that like button. Feel free to subscribe. I am Paul Zeidman. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. You can check out my screenwriting blog, MaximumZ at MaximumZ.blog. I'm also on Twitter. I'm not calling it the other thing at Maximum_Z. I'm also on Instagram at Pez Screenwriting, PEZ. Those are my initials. Also, I've have been forgetting to include this. This podcast has its own Twitter account at podcast CWL for Creative Writing Life. So feel free to follow us there, and we will follow you back because that's the kind of attention whores that we are. Uh, anyway, so like you said, he's Carlos. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy. Most importantly, go write something.